Nice to be here with all of you. If we don't know each other yet, my name is Yacov Fruchter, and it's good to be marking time with all of you today and celebrating Shabbat and Chol Moed. And actually what I want to talk about this morning is time. Time. The way I start my days on most days of the week is that I wake up, I roll over, I pull out my phone, that's usually hopefully charging on the side of my bed, and the first thing I do is I take a look at my app called Red Alert, which notifies me of when there are rocket attacks or sirens anywhere in Israel. I have it set for Jerusalem, where my sister lives, and Kiryat Ata, which is our home base near Haifa. And I also have a few other places where other cousins of mine live. That's the first thing I do. Then if there was a siren in the middle of the night, then I go and I check my Fruchter family or Mishpachat Fruchter WhatsApp group to make sure that all my cousins are safe. And then I go and I take a quick look at Times of Israel to see, did my world change overnight? And that's how I currently mark time. And then mixed in is Modeani, waking my kids up for school, all of that stuff, a good cup of chai tea. But it starts with the Red Alert app and to make sure that the people that I love most are safe. How we mark time is central to the Jewish experience. And these days it feels as if it is always commingled with fear and sadness. But the reality is that the Jewish experience is all about time. Professor Eliezer Schweid of Hebrew University wrote in his book, The Jewish Experience of Time, that that's how we stay connected as a people, as Jews. We no longer all meet in one piece of land 3 times a year, as we read about in our Torah reading today, but instead we're able to remain in sync with one another by the way that we mark time. And thank God, we have an abundance of ways in which we mark time for joy. This morning, someone here in shul, probably more than one of you, greeted me with the words of Moadim L'Simcha. I responded with the Yiddish, Guten Moed. And then the person who said Moadim L'Simcha to me said, what does Moed actually mean? Right, which we wish each other, especially on Chol Moed, right, the intermediary days where we don't say Chag Sameach, so we say Shabbat Shalom because it's Shabbat, and then we say Moadim L'Simcha. And Moed really means time, established time. And so we wish for each other Moadim L'Simcha, that we should have time that is established for joy, for happiness. And the Jewish experience is absolutely full of it, right? In the creation of the world, we're going to read this later this week when we go back to the beginning of the Torah in Bereshit. Why do we have the moon and the sun and the lights? In order to have a sense of the Moadim, to have a sense of the time, so that we could be in unison with each other. Can't hear me well there? I'm going to go like this. Is that better? Okay, amazing. Thank you. It's funny, hearing each other is also important in terms of being in sync with one another. So our Torah and our Jewish experience is full of it. I wanted to share with you a piece of Torah that I learned this summer when I was at the Shalom Hartman Institute in Israel, that I learned from Dr. Professor Alana Stein-Hain, who is just wonderful, right? And this piece of Torah which comes from the Jerusalem Talmud, Talmud Yerushalmi, Masechet Shabbat, so the tractate that deals with the Sabbath and really deals with time, deals with the question of what does one do when they're confused about time, when we're not sure when Shabbat is. So in the Babylonian Talmud, they deal with the question a little bit differently. They say somebody who forgot when Shabbat is. And if you forgot when Shabbat is, when do you keep Shabbat? That's the question that they pose. In the Jerusalem Talmud, they ask a slightly different question, because they actually answer a different question, is what do you mean when you say somebody forgot what day of the week it is? And actually, when I was learning this together with my study partner, my Yacov Fruchter, we made a whole list of what are the circumstances in which somebody would not know what day of the week it is. Came up with a pretty cool list. And one of them actually gets brought up in the Jerusalem Talmud, and here it is. It says, Gadol shenishba ben hagoyim, a Jewish adult who was taken captive, who was a hostage among non-Jews, what do they do? That's the case. Someone who is a hostage, and we have to assume by this that somehow because they're a hostage, maybe they were knocked out as they were taken, or just became impossible because maybe there's been no sunlight because they're deep in a tunnel, and they have no idea what day of the week it is. How do they keep Shabbat? And of course, because this is a Jewish text, there is a debate. Rav u'Shmuel, so the two great rabbis, Rav and Shmuel, they disagree. Chad amar moneh shisha ve'oseh Shabbat. Rav says, you count 6 days, and on the 7th day you mark Shabbat. Why? Why do we do it this way? Because that's what we read in the Torah this morning. Shesh yamim tavod, for 6 days you shall work, and the 7th day you'll have Shabbat, which is exactly the way the world was created, right? God creates the world for 6 days. 7th day God establishes Shabbat, so that's what you do. Shmuel says, no, that's not what we do. Instead he says, Oseh Shabbat umoneh shisha. Do Shabbat right away. You're not sure when Shabbat is, just do it right now. And then count 6 days, try to live life as best as you can as a hostage, try to survive. And what's that based on? That's based on the idea that human beings were created on the 6th day. And so right away after that, human beings were created, right? What's it all about? It's about actually surviving when you're a hostage, and then you can mark Shabbat. But of course, there's a third opinion. Rabbi Yitzchak ben Elazar says, and I love this, count 6 days, mark Shabbat. Count 5 days after that, mark Shabbat. 4 days Shabbat, 3 days Shabbat, 2 days Shabbat, 1 day in Shabbat. Why? Because eventually, you're going to get it right. And what does it mean to get it right, according to Rabbi Yitzchak? Is to be marking Shabbat at the exact same time as the rest of the Jewish people. That the essence of it is to mark it exactly at the same time as the Jewish people. Some of you may have actually heard me teach this, because I taught this in the session on Yom Kippur that I did the hot topic with artist Aaron Fine. And you're like, oh, I've seen it somewhere. Because I love this piece of Torah. What it's talking really about is the question of, can we do Judaism on our own? Can Judaism be a solo sport? Whenever I'm working with conversion students, I talk about this. Now I'm going to start teaching them this piece of Gemara, but I talk about this, which is that we actually can't. Judaism, Yiddishkeit, is full of Jewish values, of how to be a good person in the world, of mitzvot. But we can't divorce them from doing it in unison with the rest of the Jewish people. We have to do it at the right time. So Rabbi Yitzchak says, find a way to figure it out. And I actually don't know the math of this. Any mathematicians here? How often will you end up doing it at the same time as the rest of the Jewish people? Anybody? If you do it the way Rabbi Yitzchak says? Well, it won't be once in 7, right? Because 1 week you're doing it, right? And then the next week you're doing 5 in 1 and 4 in 1, right? Okay, whatever the math is. But it's a desire to be, connected, to actually be on the same page with the rest of the Jewish people. And that's what Eliezer Schweid says, is that's how we stay alive actually as the Jewish people. Over all this time, throughout all this history of suffering, is to stay connected. And most of the time, it's moadim lesimcha. It's time that leads us to happiness, to joy, to celebration. Most of the time. We read this morning, continue to read from Kohelet. And I'm trying to dove in at all the minions. So I was upstairs for Kohelet at the little minyan when they did the whole thing today. And in the 3rd chapter, of course, is the famous line made famous by the birds, right? For every season, turn, turn, turn. I think the original is actually better. That there's a time for everything, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, and it goes on and on. There are only 2 of these clauses that are different than all the others, where it says, et sephod ve'et rekod. In the translation that we used here, which is actually from the Art Scroll, it says for et sephod as a time to wail, and et rekod as a time to dance. And what's different about them is that those are the only ones that don't have a lamed, a time to. And although they're translated here as a time to, we're supposed to read it as et sephod, which I'm actually not going to read as a time to wail, but just as a time to grieve, as a time to mourn, the hesped as a eulogy, right? That we say at a funeral, et sephod, a time to just eulogize and grieve, and a time to dance. That those things should be all-consuming when we're doing them. But this has actually been a year where all of the times are mixed up. That almost every moment that we feel joy, we also feel some sadness, which also is a Jewish thing, as we know. And when we feel fear, hopefully we can also feel some hope. When we feel alone, we can also feel connection. It's kind of the year that we're having, is that there are no disparate feelings or emotions, that everything is mixed in. And so I want to end actually with a bracha for this time, that we're in a holiday that we say, Samachta bechagecha ve'ayitach sameach, that you rejoice in the holiday of Sukkot, ve'ayita ach sameach, and that you feel only joy. And so my bracha for all of us is that we can again have a time, a moed, where we can just feel joy. Where that is it, where it doesn't have to be so mixed with all the other emotions, and where we can feel connected to the entire Jewish people, where we can say Shabbat and mark Shabbat and say Shabbat Shalom without knowing that there are some people who exist in this reality that is in this Gemara, that there are Jewish adults or Jewish people at all that are held hostage, but that we can once again be in a moment where all of us are free, and that we can just feel a complete sense of joy. And with that, I'll wish you a Shabbat Shalom, a Moadim L'Simcha, a Guter Moed, a time of joy, Moadim L'Simcha V'Sason. Shabbat Shalom to you all.